Allied POWs in Japanese camps during World War II faced a brutal reality few survived to tell. Starvation, disease, violent beatings, and relentless forced labor were a daily nightmare under captors who saw surrender as disgrace and treated prisoners without mercy. Japanese POW camps were arguably the worst of all, with more deaths occurring in these camps than in any others during the war. Today, we uncover the grim reality of life inside a Japanese prisoner of war camp. For many Allied soldiers, the nightmare began with mass surrenders after devastating defeats. In February 1942, the fall of Singapore, dubbed Britain's worst military disaster, saw about 80,000 British, Indian and Australian troops lay down their arms. They joined tens of thousands of other captives from earlier campaigns, suddenly at the mercy of an enemy that viewed them with contempt. Similarly, in the Philippines that same year, American and Filipino forces on the Bataan Peninsula, exhausted and out of supplies, were overwhelmed and compelled to surrender. The Bataan Death March that followed has become infamous for its brutality. Some 75,000 POWs were forced to march roughly 65 miles under a blazing tropical sun with virtually no food or water. Stragglers who collapsed from exhaustion or thirst were beaten, bayoneted or shot by the Japanese escorts. Civilians who tried to pass water to the prisoners did so at risk of their lives. By the time the march ended at Camp O'Donnell, thousands had perished along the route. After capture, the ordeal continued with hellish transport to prison camps across the Japanese Empire. The Japanese crammed prisoners into suffocating rail boxcars or the holds of cargo ships infamously known as hell ships. On these voyages, men were packed so tightly they could hardly sit or breathe in the sweltering heat. One account describes 1,600 POWs shoved into a space meant for 500 on a prison ship. With hatches sealed and ventilation cut off to silence the prisoners' anguished cries, the air turned to poison. Trapped in darkness, men collapsed from heat and thirst. Disease spread rapidly in the filth, and Allied submarines or bombers, unaware these unmarked ships carried POWs, sometimes attacked them, killing many of the very men they sought to liberate. For those who lived through these journeys, arrival at a camp merely marked the start of a new chapter of suffering. Life inside a Japanese POW camp was a daily descent into degradation. Prisoners were typically given only a handful of rice and maybe a few vegetable scraps to eat, far too little to sustain a grown man. This starvation diet, often less than 700 calories per day, left men steadily wasting away. POWs grew gaunt and hollow-eyed. Ribs and bones protruded from bodies tormented by hunger. The Japanese guards deliberately withheld Red Cross food parcels meant for the prisoners, so the men had to scrounge for sustenance by bartering among themselves or eating whatever insects, weeds, or scraps they could find. Severe malnutrition soon set in, causing illnesses like beriberi due to vitamin deficiency that swelled their limbs and weakened their hearts. Camps were usually overcrowded and filthy. Dozens or even hundreds of captives were jammed into bamboo barracks or makeshift shelters with little sanitation. Clean water was scarce, and latrine facilities were primitive, leading to contamination and relentless disease. Tropical illnesses thrived in these conditions. Malaria-bearing mosquitoes, dengue fever, cholera, dysentery, skin ulcers, and fungal infections plagued the prisoners. Without proper medical supplies, even minor wounds or maladies could turn fatal. Japanese camp authorities offered minimal medical care. Often sick men lay in misery on bare bunks, with only the improvised care of fellow POWs or captured Allied medics to rely on. Each day followed a cruel routine. At dawn, weak and feverish men were driven out for morning roll call, where they stood for long periods at attention, sometimes in punishing heat or torrential rain, while guards counted and often recounted them. Afterward, they were dispatched to work details, if they were not already assigned to distant labor camps. The prisoners' physical state deteriorated rapidly under these hardships. One survivor noted that within months, we were all skin and bones, weighing around 100 pounds, down from a healthy weight well above that. The psychological strain of such an existence was immense. Cut off from the outside world, unsure if they would ever see home again, POWs battled despair as much as disease. Under constant watch, they had little freedom of movement or privacy. Writing diaries or keeping personal mementos was forbidden. Violations could invite severe punishment. Despite this, some prisoners secretly chronicled their ordeal or drew sketches, hiding these records at great risk. To combat the monotony and terror, POWs clung to routines or small rituals, quietly observing banned religious services, teaching each other languages, or fantasizing about food and family. Life in the camp was brutal, but the forced labor was even worse. The Japanese exploited Allied POWs for massive construction projects across occupied territories, the most infamous being the Burma-Thailand Death Railway. Starting in 1942, over 60,000 British, Australian, Dutch, and American prisoners were driven into jungles to carve a 415-kilometer railroad through mountains and swamps using only picks, shovels, and bare hands. Under relentless heat and monsoon rains, men in rags battled leeches, disease, and exhaustion, while guards beat them to work faster. By completion, 16,000 POWs had died, with over 100,000 conscripted Asian laborers also perishing. Beyond the death railway, POWs were forced to build roads, bridges, and airstrips under brutal conditions. On Palawan, prisoners felled trees and hauled coral rock in the tropical sun, beaten if they slowed down. You either worked very hard or you were beaten, unto death if necessary, one survivor recalled. Others were shipped throughout Japan, Korea, and Manchuria to labor in factories, mines, and shipyards, despite international laws forbidding POWs from war production. In Japan's mines, men worked in collapsing tunnels filled with toxic fumes, their bodies rotting from constant wet conditions. Weak and malnourished, they were still expected to meet harsh quotas under the threat of fatal beatings. Many worked until they simply collapsed. Japanese guards ruled the camps with iron discipline and fear, seeing POWs as disgraceful for surrendering. Even small infractions, like failing to bow, could lead to immediate beatings with bamboo canes, belts, or rifle butts, so routine that prisoners came to expect them. Beatings were common for stealing food or working too slowly, with guards and the feared Kempitai military police using cruel methods like tying men to trees for whipping or forcing them to stand in painful positions for hours. Some punishments were horrific. One Australian POW lost both legs after being forced to kneel on sharp bamboo until infection set in, while others were thrown into tiny, airless cells with no food or water for days, often leading to madness or permanent injury. The Japanese used collective punishment to instill fear, sometimes executing entire groups if one man escaped. American POW Henry Wilato recalled how escape attempts led to 9 innocent men being beheaded in retaliation, which led to prisoners policing each other through fear of punishment. Even sickness offered no reprieve. Guards dragged feverish, barely conscious men from infirmaries to meet work quotas, forcing comrades to carry them through the day until many died where they stood. The unpredictable cruelty of guards left prisoners in constant fear, never knowing which minor slip could trigger a brutal punishment. In August 1945, Japan's surrender brought the torment of POWs to an end. Guards fled or changed behavior overnight as Allied forces reached the camps, finding emaciated, disease-ridden men barely alive. Nearly 1 in 4 Allied POWs in Japanese hands had died by war's end, and many survivors were too weak to walk, carried out as skeletal figures who had somehow endured. Liberation began a long road to recovery. Some prisoners died even after rescue, their bodies too damaged by starvation. Others faced months of treatment for disease and malnutrition, returning home as unrecognizable shadows of the men who had left for war. Many struggled with nightmares and flashbacks, while others remained silent, unable to share the horrors they had endured. After the war, Allied tribunals tried and executed some Japanese officers and camp guards for POW abuse, but many perpetrators were never prosecuted. For survivors, no punishment could erase their suffering. Their stories often went unheard for decades, overshadowed by other wartime horrors, until historians and memorials finally began to honor their sacrifice and resilience. If you found this video interesting, please consider liking and subscribing to our channel. Also, check out our video on the life of a galley slave in the Age of Sail on your screen now. Thank you for watching, stay curious, and we'll see you on the next one.